In Pokemon society, it is considered very shameful to be ranked in the underused tier. Pokemon in this tier are considered mid, average, not on the level of the prestigious overused Pokemon. And for this reason, these underused individuals are not often talked about. But I have a different perspective on the matter. I think to be ranked in underused is pretty impressive. Yes, you're just shy of the OU rank, but to be underused, you have to be a solid Pokemon still. These Pokemon are not terrible. Some of them even have niche usage in higher tiers, and they are a significant cut above the very bottom tier Pokemon down in NU or PU. I think especially in Gen 9, the UU tier is a pretty strong selection of Pokemon. Gen 9 was a significant power increase for the series, and a lot of people have made the observation that Gen 9's UU tier looks similar to the OU tiers of prior generations. That's how much the power has increased. In fact, a lot of staples from prior generations have fallen to UU in Gen 9. So I wanted to take a look at some unsung heroes of the UU tier throughout history. Because I think that if a Pokemon is consistently ranked in the UU tier, it shows that they are on some level a fundamentally good Pokemon. Throughout generations, still desirable at this power level. To some extent, this is commendable. The Pokemon that gave me this idea to begin with was Cobalion. Cobalion is, in a way, one of the most consistent Pokemon of all time. Because Cobalion, in Generation 5 when it was introduced, was a UU ranked Pokemon. And it has been UU ranked in every single generation since then, including the current generation of Gen 9. And I think that that is actually very impressive. Cobalion holding onto relevance in this tier that has actually gotten more powerful in each generation, just like OU does, is an admirable thing that should be highlighted. I mean, if we take a quick look at some of the Pokemon present in Gen 9 UU to give you an idea, we have, for example, Azumarill, who is a former OU staple. Excadrill, also a top Pokemon in OU for generations. Greninja, Heatran, Hippowdon, Keldeo, Latios, Manaphy, Rotom Wash. I mean, these are all OU staples of the past that are now UU in Gen 9, falling from grace in a significant way. A lot of these are Pokemon that people would never think would fall. And now all of these former OU Pokemon that were once on such a moral high ground thinking that they're above Cobalion are now brought down to his level, peers with Cobalion. And Cobalion is actually more powerful than many of them in this format. Cobalion's consistency here is commendable, and when you look at the Pokemon, it sort of makes a bit of sense why this guy is still good in UU. It's kind of an eternally UU Pokemon that will perhaps always be ranked UU until the end of time. Maybe it will be Gen 50 UU and Cobalion's still hanging out and defeating like Mewtwo or somebody who is now UU by that. I don't know, crazier things have happened. Cobalion is a fighting steel type Pokemon, which is quite a solid combination. With this combo you have 8 resistances, which is really good. You're only weak to 3 types, and it's pretty nice offensively too. Fighting is a great type, and steel complements it nicely by hitting fairy type super effectively, where fighting wouldn't. So there's a lot to love about a fighting steel type combo, and Cobalion has nice stats to take advantage of this typing. Cobalion has very well-rounded stats, especially its great defense stat of 129 and great speed stat of 108, plus solid HP of 91. This Pokemon has a beautiful balance of bulk, speed, and offense, and so Cobalion is really reliable as a proactive physical check to things. Ever since its introduction in Gen 5, Cobalion has had 3 key options that are very important for it. Stealth Rock, which is a very powerful entry hazard, always beautiful to have, gives it something significant to do on a defensive entry point. Thunder Wave, very solid status, inflicting move that has a high impact, paralyzing the enemy instantly. And Volt Switch, which is kind of a random option on a Pokemon like this, but a very much appreciated one. It is a form of pivoting, allowing you to leverage your defensive switch in for a bit of momentum and attack and then switch out, of course. Cobalion would probably prefer to have a U-turn, but Volt Switch does at least have the benefit of not triggering contact effects, so Cobalion can be thankful for that. And these 3 options are still used today in Gen 9 UU. These have offered serious consistency for Cobalion. This is the sort of Pokemon that does quite well in OU. It's kind of similar to Landorus Therian, isn't it, in a way? Landorus Therian has a good defensive typing. These evergreen options like the pivoting of U-turn and the hazard setting of Stealth Rock. And for that reason, it's very easy to fit on teams and is very consistent throughout the franchise. Cobalion is a bit like that, but for the tier just below. For the UU power level, you always need some sort of guy that can switch in on a physical attacker, wall it a little bit while also doing useful stuff and being a bit proactive, and Cobalion offers exactly that. This defensive utility set is straightforwardly good throughout many years of competitive UU, but Cobalion also has some pretty good set variety. Its attack and special attack stats are both 90, which is workable in the UU power level, especially with its bulk. And the fact that Cobalion gets both a physical and a special boosting move. Cobalion gets Swords Dance for a physical boosting move, +2 attack. It also gets Calm Mind for a special boosting move. Plus, it gets attacks on both sides of the spectrum. So not only can it operate with nice defensive utility, it can be a boost sweeper in 2 different ways. And that variety allows it to fit on more teams than it could otherwise, filling more roles, of course. It is also worth noting that Cobalion did receive a significant buff in Gen 9. Gen 9 granted Cobalion the new option of Body Press, which is a perfect fit on the Pokemon. This is exactly what it wants. Body Press is a fighting type attack that scales based on your high defense stat instead of your attack stat. Cobalion's defense stat is great, so it deals a lot of damage with Body Press. I think this is part of the reason that in Gen 9 Cobalion is keeping up with a lot of the former OU staples that have fallen down to UU, because this is quite a nice power increase for it. I think this guy is in contention for greatest UU Pokemon ever, ranked UU and good in UU in every single generation it has existed in. A commendable feat, and in some ways Cobalion is more admirable than former OU ranked Pokemon that have now fallen way down to the very low ranks. Cobalion is far more consistent throughout its career. Slow and steady wins the race, they say. Cobalion shows up, it does good work, and it has never experienced the shame of falling down a tier. This has never happened for it, because Cobalion's mind is like a fortress. He does not panic in the face of new and frightening threats, and he does not want for more. He does not want OU. Cobalion accepts his place, and perhaps that's the reason that he performs so well in that allotted location. Perhaps we could learn something from Cobalion and his beautiful attitude towards life and his personal career. The other contender for King of UU, folks, would have to be the aptly named Nidoking, who is a Pokemon that has appeared in UU in 6 generations in a row from Gens 3 to 8. This Pokemon is ranked UU, and that beats out Cobalion, who is only UU ranked in 5 generations. So to be fair to Cobalion, it's only existed in 5 generations, but Nidoking outdoes it in raw numbers. And to play devil's advocate for Nidoking, this guy is not in Gen 9, so it could even be 7 if it was in Gen 9. I think it's about UU power level, probably. So where does Nidoking's consistency in this area come from? How does one become ranked UU in 6 straight generations? That's impressive work. Well, Nidoking has a good set of traits. It is a poison ground type Pokemon, which is a nice type combo, notably offering 2 status immunities, immunity to Thunder Wave and immunity to being poisoned. Ground typing always beautiful, it's a top tier type with excellent offensive benefits. Nidoking's stats are actually quite average. This is its biggest detriment. It only has 92 attack, 85 special attack, 85 speed, pretty middling bulk as well. They're not the worst stats of all time, but they're unremarkable. But what has always been an advantage of Nidoking, ever since Gen 3, where it first found its footing as a UU Pokemon, is its offensive move pool. Nidoking has a fantastic offensive move pool with such options as Ice Beam, Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, Sludge Bomb, all sorts of great special attacks, great physical attacks in the form of Earthquake and Mega Horn. Mega Horn actually nice coverage in Gen 3 specifically. It's got a Rock Slide as well. It basically has coverage for everything, it feels like. Nidoking has fantastic coverage on the physical and the special side. And in Gens 3 and 4, this was enough for Nidoking to be UU ranked. Its Not the most amazing stat-wise, but the beautiful move pool of Nidoking and the lower power level at the time overall was enough for a UU ranked in Gen 3 and 4. But then Gen 5 came around and Nidoking received an astronomical new buff. This is probably the perfect buff for Nidoking to skyrocket its viability instantaneously. They gave Nidoking in Gen 5 the ability Sheer Force, which is a fantastic offensive ability that will boost the power of moves that have a secondary effect by 1.3x at the cost of nullifying the effect. An example of a secondary effect is Ice Beam having a 10% freeze chance. You just get rid of the 10% freeze chance for a straightforward damage increase. And in most cases, the damage increase is way better than the unlikely secondary effect on all these moves. And Nidoking has so many great coverage moves, all with these little 10% secondary effects that are nothing to him. The damage increase is far more significant. Nidoking can also equip a Life Orb, which enhances damage by another 1.3x on all attacks, and usually comes at the cost of recoil damage. You take 1/10 of your max HP after using an attack, but for some reason when Sheer Force activates and nullifies a move's secondary effect, the Life Orb recoil doesn't happen. This is another one of the beautiful benefits of Sheer Force, is that you can just chuck a Life Orb on and basically have no detriment to it anymore, as you get a free damage increase with no recoil as long as you use a move that procced Sheer Force, which is probably all of your attacks anyway. So this buff just straightforwardly enhanced Nidoking's damage by such a significant extent that even with only 85 special attack, Nidoking suddenly became an elite special attacker. The guy's special move pool is really good with options like Earth Power, amazing, ground type special attack that is rather uncommon actually. You've got Ice Beam, Fire Blast, Thunderbolt, Sludge, Wave, Flamethrower, the physical coverage of Rock Slide if you want some physical coverage, which also gets a Sheer Force boost. I mean, this Pokemon got so much better overnight. And this coincided with a power increase in Gen 5, so most UU Pokemon of the past probably fell way down, but not Nidoking. Nidoking clung on to UU status here, and had a new identity for itself as the big Sheer Force Life Orb guy with every coverage move on the planet. As a result of this buff, Nidoking even saw some OU usage in a couple of generations, with its unique moveset options and damage output, giving it some merit over even OU offensive threats in certain cases. I think Nidoking is the ultimate king of UU. This power spike in Gen 5 from Sheer Force has allowed it to persist in UU in every following generation, and it's amazing that it was even UU before it got this for 2 generations in a row. A testament to the power of its move pool alone. But this buff was of course what solidified it as the king, and it would probably be 7 generations in a row of UU if this guy was in Gen 9. I can't imagine this being any less good. I think this would still be an incredible breaker for the Gen 9 UU format. And the beauty of it is that variety in its movesets allows it to adapt to different metagame conditions. I think Nidoking is quite upset about not being invited to Gen 9. I think he and Cobalion have developed a real camaraderie over the years, and the absence of Nidoking has left Cobalion feeling a bit lonely. They are incredible friends. They have a very strong bond that has persisted through time as UU Titans, and they are not really in a competition. They have solidarity with one another, and they view each other as brothers. And that has been stripped away all because the Gen 9 developers cruelly did not put Nidoking in Gen 9, which I consider to be an affront and a very significant slight to Nidoking. Some theorize that it was actually Terrakion who orchestrated this whole thing, because Terrakion, of course, had a real superiority complex in Gen 5, being ranked OU while Cobalion was only UU. And as Terrakion has fallen down in the ranks ever since, and been overtaken in rank by Cobalion, in fact, Terrakion is unable to handle the hit to his pride. And so he has struck Cobalion where it hurt the most, eliminating his best friend Nidoking from the equation. This is only a theory, of course, but I think it does line up with Terrakion's motives and his character. He's considered kind of a joke in the community, in the Pokemon society. He's considered a bit of a laughing stock, so he would pull some crap like this, wouldn't he? Next, I would like to give some respect to Crocodile, an often forgotten crocodile-themed Pokemon, who has actually been ranked UU in 4 straight generations. From its inception in Gen 5 all the way up until Gen 8, only falling off in Gen 9, where it's ranked RU. That's still a commendable level of consistency, I think. And Crocodile is a Pokemon I've always liked. It's just not quite on the OU power level, never has been, but it's a cool Pokemon. It's sort of like a Landorus Therian Jr., but it's a ground dark type Pokemon, which is a fun type combination. It has the ability Intimidate, and an okay stat distribution. Its attack is 117, it's got a pretty high HP. Its speed is only 92, its defenses are only 70. These stats are not going to knock your socks off, but it's a pretty good ground type attacker with Intimidate. And that's enough to be UU in multiple generations, I suppose. It also helps that Crocodile's other ability is Moxie, which is also very good, granting an attack raise if you get a KO with an attack, allowing Crocodile to ramp with a Choice Scarf set and be a bit of a late game cleanup Pokemon. That's quite powerful. Both fantastic abilities, Intimidate and Moxie. With these 2 great abilities at its disposal, it also has a bit more consistency. Since it can lean into different areas, it can be a bulky utility attacker with Stealth Rock, Knockoff, Intimidate, etc. Similar to like a Garchomp, or an offensive Landorus Therian, or it can go for the more win condition route, late game cleaner route, and go Choice Scarf Moxie. I find this guy weirdly compelling because he's like just below the OU ground types. He's the next best thing behind Garchomp and Landorus Therian and Excadrill. He's just shy, but he's almost there, kind of. And he's a dark type, and he's a crocodile, damn it. He's a crocodile. It occurs to me that I'm running out of things to say about this wonderful crocodile, and that's a shame. He really is just like a slightly worse version of the standard bulky ground type attacker that you see in OU all the time. He's just a level below the Garchomps and the Landorus Therians and the Excadrills of the world. But I admire him all the same. I think he's interesting and pretty well balanced and pretty fun. I tend to enjoy his presence in UU formats, and I like using him. I think that Rotom Heat deserves a shout out. An often forgotten Rotom. This is the second best of the Rotoms. Rotom Wash gets all the attention. Rotom Wash gets all the praise. Rotom Heat is often forgotten. And this guy has been ranked UU in 4 straight generations as well, from Gen 5 to Gen 8. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's competing with itself. You can't run more than 2 Rotoms, so it would scarcely have much of a place in the higher tiers where Rotom Wash reigns supreme, but the second best Rotom is going to, of course, be quite dominant in the UU tier as a result. Rotom Heat is, of course, an electric fire type Pokemon, which is a beautiful combination to have when you have Levitate. Levitate grants ground immunity, and if not for Levitate, you would be ×4 weak to ground type attacks. Erasing a ×4 weakness is outstanding here, and the typing actually ends up feeling pretty good as a result of that. You're only weak to 2 types, rock and water. And you got a lot of beautiful resistances, immunity to burn. Rotom Heat has access to the move Overheat, which is actually a pretty nice hit and run option on it that in some ways feels more consistent than Rotom Wash's Hydro Pump, which can, of course, miss and doesn't have as much power. Rotom Heat can use Overheat quite well. Throwing it out there and then just Volt switching out or switching out directly. It's a move that feels like it fits well on the Pokemon and makes it feel a bit more offensively imposing with this high power option that it can very easily take advantage of to leverage its defense for a big fire type hit with a drawback that is conveniently overcome. Rotom Heat just as good as Rotom Wash at spreading burn and pivoting with Volt Switch. And Rotom Heat does lend itself well to choice sets too. Choice Specs Overheat hits very well. Choice Scarf sets are fantastic for speed control. Rotom Heat does suffer from the fact that fire typing brings with it a rock weakness, and therefore it is vulnerable to the stealth rock entry hazard. That is never fantastic. And that is something that is a plague on Rotom Heat for many years of its life. I think that it makes sense that an oven Pokemon would not enjoy rocks generally. I mean, a rock could break the window of the oven and that would ruin the whole oven. That wouldn't work anymore. Probably be a safety hazard. I imagine if you put rocks inside of an oven, that can't be good. They would become very hot. I wouldn't advise that. That doesn't seem like a good idea. It might even cause the oven to explode or something. I don't know. I just would never do it. It seems like a stupid thing to do. And so Rotom Heat, the oven Pokemon, not enjoying rocks, lines up very well with reality. But despite the rocks being perilous for this Pokemon, it persists in UU for so many years, and you can see why. It's Rotom Wash Jr., basically, with some advantages, mostly disadvantages compared to Rotom Wash, but some things are better. In some ways, the Stab Overheat is more offensively potent than what Rotom Wash can accomplish. It has different defensive benefits. It's got the burn immunity. It resists Fairy. It can wall grass types. It can do fun things like that. And in Gen 8, finally, the heavy-duty boots would be released, which greatly enhanced Rotom Heat's viability. I recall it actually being ranked OU briefly in Gen 8. Ended up UU by the end of the generation, but there was a time where it actually saw OU viability for the first time, which was cool. It was short-lived, though. However, in Gen 9, I don't know what happened. I actually don't really get how this happened, but Rotom Heat fell down to the depths of hell? How could Rotom Heat be ranked in PU? Doesn't seem to make any sense. This is a perfectly respectable Rotom with all the advantages that Rotom's always appreciated. I guess it doesn't have defog anymore, but that's hardly too much of a problem, is it? How could Rotom Heat be considered on par with Bruxish? You telling me Bruxish and Rotom Heat are in the same tier? That doesn't seem right. That just doesn't seem right to me. Cramorant and Rotom Heat are peers? I'm flabbergasted by Rotom Heat's PU ranking. Surely something is wrong. It makes sense for it not to be UU again in Gen 9, because Rotom Wash is in UU in Gen 9, so that would overtake it as the superior Rotom, but I would have thought RU for Rotom Heat if you asked me, if I were to guess. PU is crazy, man. Despite this, and despite the terrible shame and humiliation of being ranked in a lower competitive tier than Flamigo, I think Rotom Heat is commendable for its consistency for many years in UU. It deserves at least some recognition for that, and I would not define Rotom Heat by its current Gen 9 performance, which is uncharacteristically low for this oven, which doesn't seem to make much sense to me because the oven is a very useful household device that can reheat things and even bake different baked goods. I just don't see how a device that can create lasagna could ever be ranked in PU. That doesn't compute to me. Somebody please explain how this has happened and the injustice that has unfolded here. I think I would give a shout out to Swampert here, and this is an interesting one because Swampert is far more well known for its excellent role in OU in the very early generations of 3 and 4. In Gen 3 OU, Swampert's one of the strongest Pokemon in the format. In Gen 4 OU, Swampert is also very respectable and prominent, but not many people talk about Swampert after that, probably because after that, it became kind of average. It started to get outclassed by better bulky water types, started to feel a little bit outdated and antiquated. But following Gen 4, Swampert would be ranked UU for the first time, and Swampert is a Pokemon that can adapt to new conditions well and accept that its time in the sun was over. Swampert has a good attitude, and so for the next 4 generations, Swampert would be ranked UU consistently, all the way up until Gen 8, Gen 5 to Gen 8. Swampert has always been a simple but effective Pokemon. It has the Water-Ground type combination, which is one of the strongest type combos in the whole game. With only a single weakness to Grass, complete immunity to Electric, and various beautiful resistances that are much appreciated. It's an elite defensive typing. It's even quite nice offensively as water and ground stab moves are appreciated. The problem with Swampert from Gen 5 onwards is that its ability started to feel kind of weak. Swampert has, of course, the ability Torrent, which all water-type starters have access to. At a third or less of your max HP, you deal 1.5x damage with water attacks. It's a pretty bad ability, it's not that exciting. It was much better in Gen 3 and 4, where the power level was low enough that getting hit into that Torrent health range was more likely, and Swampert is a Pokemon that often found itself in that Torrent range, but From Gen 5 onwards, this ability started to feel way less relevant. And the hidden ability Swampert received was Damp, which is just not that amazing. This is an ability that grants an immunity to explosion and other self-destruction effects. This came a generation too late. This would have been quite good in Gen 3 or 4, but in Gen 5, Explosion, the move, got severely nerfed, dealing half as much damage as it used to. So not many things are even using Explosion anymore, making the ability Damp quite irrelevant, actually. Swampert would rather use Torrent, which at least has a chance to do something. But when you're stuck with Torrent, that's not a great sign, and it means that Swampert is kind of lagging behind other more exciting water ground types with better abilities now, like Gastrodon and Quagsire, who actually overtook it due to their superior abilities. But Swampert's stats are still quite impressive and well-rounded. 100 HP, 90 in each of the defenses, and a great attack stat of 110. Very solid stat distribution among starters, to be honest. Very nicely rounded. That plus its typing plus its very strong move pool meant that it actually didn't fall below UU for a very long time. Based on what I just talked about Swampert feeling antiquated and being outclassed by other bulky water types as the series went on, you'd think it would actually fall below UU, but amazingly it clung on for ages there. It also didn't really receive any noteworthy buffs for a long time. It was just being Swampert and being solid enough. I suppose you really can't go too wrong with a bulky water ground type that has Stealth Rock and Scald and Earthquake. The most significant buff that Swampert ever received since then was in Gen 8, where it was blessed with the new option of Flip Turn, which is a water type physical attack with 60 power that pivots you out of the field just like U-Turn does. And this is something that Swampert was sorely lacking. Didn't have any form of pivoting in the past. This simple new addition gave Swampert enough steam to cling on even further in the Gen 8 environment, and in fact, it actually saw some OU usage occasionally as a result of this, as the option of Flip Turn allowed it to finally stand out from other water ground types that had been outclassing it for so many years in OU. Swampert finally had something over them. Flip Turn is significant. Pivoting is a fundamental mechanic in competitive singles and one of the most important things a Pokemon can have access to. With Flip Turn, Swampert could now keep up the pace and not sacrifice too much momentum as it switches in. And Swampert did receive one final buff in Generation 9 with the addition of Knock Off to its moveset, an option any Pokemon would love to have, item removal, dark coverage of course, but not enough to help Swampert that much in Gen 9 specifically, as it is now ranked NU, which feels like a real fall from grace, doesn't it? That's okay, Swampert, many Pokemon are getting killed in Gen 9, it's the generation where former staples are ZU somehow. At least you're above Snorlax, your old adversary from Gen 3, at least you're outranking him. It's a bit sad to see Swampert in NU, to be honest, and I think it's a shame that the ability it got back in Gen 5 was Damp, which would have actually been really good in Gen 4, and amazing in Gen 3, maybe too powerful in Gen 3. But in Gen 5 it's just irrelevant. No one's using explosion moves anymore at all. It feels like it just got nothing. It's still using Torrent all these years later. Doesn't feel right. I feel like Swampert, this classic guy, he's quite a beloved water type starter, isn't he? He should be using more than Torrent in 2026. It's a bit absurd. They could give him something else, couldn't they? I believe they gave him Polion Competitive, and some other starters got even new abilities in Gen 9, so I don't see why Swampert couldn't. But that's okay, Swampert does not hold it against Blaziken for receiving Speed Boost while he got Damp. Swampert has no malice in his heart. He's got a smile on his face all through these years, and he's just happy to be here. He's just happy to be used, and a real highlight of his life was being OU viable on niche teams in Gen 8. He was very proud of that. And finally, it is my pleasure to speak about one of my personal favorite Pokemon of all time, Mamoswine. I've always been fond of Mamoswine, and I believe it to be one of the most beautifully designed Pokemon ever. And Mamoswine was once more than a UU Pokemon. It was OU viable in its debut game of Gen 4. It was a bit awkward to use in the generation due to its lack of good Ice Stab, but it still saw some play thanks to its interesting Ice Ground type combination. The Ice Shard option being very good, and its high HP and attack offering some real benefits. But the peak of Mamoswine's life was of course Gen 5, where it is firmly OU ranked, and Mamoswine exists as a bit of a dragon slayer in this generation. Gen 5 OU is overrun with so many dragon types in OU. This is before fairy types existed to shut down dragon types. Mamoswine, with its option of Ice Shard, was able to threaten Garchomp and Dragonite and Salamence and Latios and all of these OU dragon types that were clicking their damn Draco Meteors and Outrages. Resistances be damned. Mamoswine was one of the best anti-dragon Pokemon, and a generally good offensive threat. This guy has Ice Ground typing, which is amazing offensively. It's one of the best offensive combinations possible. These types complement each other very beautifully, as ground types can't hit flying. Ice is super effective against flying. Ground types can't hit grass very well, as grass resists ground. Ice hits grass super effectively. Ground can also hit fire types and steel types, which ice cannot hit for neutral damage, as they are resisted. Ice and ground are so beautiful together. They are commonly used as a coverage combo, and to have stab on both of these types is tremendous. Mamoswine threatens incredible damage against just about everything in the whole game as a result of this outstanding stab combo, with the only thing really standing in its way being, I think, Rotom Wash, who is the only guy immune to ground and also resistant to ice. Everything else is threatened with enormous damage. And Mamoswine also has a good combination of offense and defense to an extent. It's got thick fat, which covers some of its weaknesses, erasing a fire weakness and adding a bit of an ice resistance, so it at least has more entry points and is not as debilitated by the ice typing. Another reason Ice Ground is complementary is because you are neutral to rock, so unlike other ice types, you're not getting destroyed by stealth rocks. And also you have entry points against electric type attacks, like a Thunderous Theory and Thunder. You switch in on that and you're really off to the races and threatening the entire world. But also Mamoswine is quite balanced with its 80 base speed, not being too fast to be overwhelming or anything. It's at a very good level and it's a beautiful presence in Gen 5 OU. But that was Mamoswine's time to exist, its greatest peak. Unfortunately, after that, Mamoswine would never reach OU ranks again. But Mamoswine is perhaps yet another one of the kings of UU since then, as from Generation 6 until Generation 9, this guy has been ranked in the UU tier. And what's particularly impressive is that it's holding on to UU viability in Gen 9, which we've talked about as being a very competitive environment. It's got a lot of Pokemon that were once OU. A lot of these kings of UU didn't make it to Gen 9 UU. Mamoswine did. Mamoswine stands out in this regard. I think that Mamoswine is one of a kind in terms of its offensive tools. It's the only Pokemon in the game with this type combo, and it's interestingly still a functional Pokemon throughout all these years in the UU tier, without a lot of the options that bring consistency, like pivoting or a reliance on using Stealth Rock. Interestingly, it does get Stealth Rock and it sometimes uses it, but it's not actually that amazing as a Stealth Rock setter compared to something like Swampert, who is bulkier and is more reliable at setting Stealth Rock. Mamoswine tends to prefer leaning into its offensive tools. It's not really a bulky rock setter in the same way. So Mamoswine has gotten by all these years just off the back of these beautiful stab options and its solid defensive traits, considering its good offensive traits. The balance of both of these things. Not that it's a defensive titan or anything, but it's decent defensively for an offensive ice type. That's what I've always loved about Mamoswine's design. Usually offensive ice types are just frail as paper. They die to anything, like Weavile or Galarian Darmanitan. They can't take a hit for the life of them. Mamoswine can actually take a hit, because its type combination is offensively good, but also defensively quite nice, erasing the rock weakness, thick fat coming in clutch, erasing the fire weakness. Mamoswine can actually switch in and take a hit, which is unheard of for an offensively oriented ice type. And also has the good HP stat, which does some heavy lifting there too. I think it's remarkable that this Pokemon has held on for so long and is still ranked UU in Gen 9. I think it's perhaps a testament to its good design. There is a harmonious balance of traits on Mamoswine that has stood the test of time relatively well, even though it's not OU anymore. Maintaining UU viability for all these years is impressive, and it's never fallen below that, ever. And those are some kings of UU that I thought were worth highlighting. Did I miss out on any prevalent UU Pokemon that you think are worth mentioning, folks? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you, as always, for watching.